Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now today we're going to be talking about brand management in gaming. Brand management is something we might be going over in a marketing class, but brand management is also relevant to gaming. Brand management itself is the idea, the notion of managing a brand. And so a brand may be comprised of a logo, a symbol, particular slogans, particular mantras, jingles, all coming together in an overarching effort to communicate something to a consumer and to really strike a relationship. Think about the relationships you have that you rely on each morning. You might rely on your relationship with Listerine in using mouthwash. You might have a relationship with Honda because you've been buying and driving those cars since high school because you happen to have some sort of brand loyalty toward that particular brand. And so brand management is very useful in helping companies maintain relationships. Additionally, it also helps companies rise to the level of awareness of consumers. So consumers might say, oh, that's a game that's made by Nintendo. And then they may be thinking about their previous experiences with Nintendo. So those memories kind of agglomerate onto each other and create really strong consolidated relationships and memories for consumers. When we think of Microsoft, we think of Sony, we might even think about the NVIDIA Shield. All of these gaming related brands mean things to us. And so we're able to create those kinds of associations so that when we're looking at games we want to purchase, or we're looking at products and services we want to purchase, it's remarkably useful to have brands because brands also serve as memory cues. If I think about Nintendo, I'm all of a sudden thinking of myself at 5 years old or at 8 years old playing Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past with my brother Michael. That's incredible. That the fact that you can mention Nintendo and it goes right to a memory, and a positive one at that, with the brand. Knowing that I forged bonds with my brother and with friends and with other people illustrates how meaningful brands can be as well. We carry brands with us because they're cues to something positive. They're cues to something useful. They're cues to something that we've had good experiences with or even bad experiences with sometimes. I may never drive a Subaru. I may never drive a Jeep. I may never drive a particular car if I've had a bad experience. Maybe if I've been in a car accident as well, that might tarnish the brand. If I have bad experiences with Sony or Microsoft, that might tarnish the brand. What's interesting in the gaming sphere, particularly for Microsoft and Sony, is that a bad experience with the PlayStation or the Xbox console can actually revert back to the parent brand. So the parent brand may suffer from your negative experience with PlayStation because it's produced by Sony. So you may say, you know what, if Sony can't get PlayStation right, I'm not going to buy, a Sony TV, or I might not buy other products from the parent brand. So this can be dangerous sometimes, and it's an interesting aspect of the video game industry because Microsoft and Sony produce other things. Sony producing a lot of hardware, Microsoft producing a lot of software. Nintendo is an interesting case as well, because when we think of the Nintendo brand, the brand itself is purely focused on gaming and purely focused on casual gaming and all types of gaming lifestyles. If we think about the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo Switch, both of those consoles have branded themselves quite well in being remarkably unique from the rest of the video game industry. Something known as blue ocean strategy, in which a company will create a new marketplace for itself in which it thrives, is something that Nintendo has done arguably 3 times in its existence. The Nintendo Wii used consumers and humans as motion capture devices. You were the controller for the Wii. For the Wii U, there was a tablet that people could use, that they could carry along with them. It didn't really work out well in translation to the consumer during its advertising and marketing campaigns. Then if we go to the Nintendo Switch, that also has created its own blue ocean. if you will, in which there really is no competitor. There was no competitor for the Nintendo Wii. Microsoft and Sony didn't really have an answer for those. There is no answer for the Nintendo Switch right now. We know PlayStation has discontinued the Vita, the handheld console that it was selling, and Microsoft really hasn't put anything out like that. And so Nintendo, once again, is thriving in its own marketplace, and it is not threatened by any other competitors. So for all of these reasons, brand management is crucial. The way that we regulate a particular relationship, the way that we build a relationship and build brand loyalty and build added value due to the brand equity, is super useful when we're talking about video games in general. So without further ado, let's get started. Brands and brand management. So I have a lot of brands here, a lot of video game brands here from all over the years. And so we can see Dreamcast and Wii and PS3 and Xbox 360 and even N64. I'm suddenly getting nostalgic looking at this stuff. But with brands and brand management, a brand is a symbol. It is a piece of communication that is disseminated for all to consume. Brand elements include coloring and packaging, the way that we look at a brand. Nintendo has always been red. Xbox always has green. Red is passion. Sega is blue. Blue is calm, cool, collected. We know that certain colors convey certain messages. Now, the difference between a brand and a product is a brand is a signage, if you will. It is a logo, It is a device in which companies can speak to consumers. But a product is meant to be held, to be interacted with. So no, you can't really hold Nintendo. You can't really hold Microsoft. You can't really touch it. But you can hold the products. You can touch the services. You get closer to the company by interacting with products and services. So products tend to be physical. They tend to be the actual tool or instrument by which we get to interact with the company's message, and get a better sense of what the company is trying to convey here. Let's keep going. So why do brands matter? It's super useful to have a brand because it allows us to identify the source of the product. We have to know where things are coming from. Oh, this game was made by Blizzard. You might have certain perceptions of Blizzard. Oh, this game was made by Ubisoft. It's an excellent company. Or Naughty Dog. Oh, I love Naughty Dog. They made all the Crash Bandicoot video games. And so it's a risk reducer. When we think about brands reduce risk. They increase the amount of opportunities that consumers view and consumers are able to sift through. And so it's a risk reducer, it reduces search cost, and consumers are able to consider more at once, if you will. So they can look at particular brands very quickly rather than reading the back of a box, rather than reading nutrition facts, if you will, rather than reading other elements to say, okay, this is made by Nintendo, this is made by Microsoft, this is made by Sony. I already know about these companies, or I have certain perceptions of these companies. And so search cost can be reduced. I don't need to spend as much time searching for a video game. I don't need to spend as much time searching for a console. I know I want Nintendo. I know I want Microsoft. It's easy. I can do this quickly. And the risk that may be associated, be it risk that is financial or psychological or social, are risks that can be mitigated. Financial risk, well, it's Nintendo. I mean, everything I've played from Nintendo is great. The $150 for the Nintendo Switch will be fine. Psychological risk could be, will this cause me harm? Social risk, will this cause me social harm? Will people think less of me, or will, people think more of me, or whatever may happen? I need to evaluate all possible avenues for making this purchasing decision and how it might influence me as a consumer. Let's keep going. So why do we need branding in the video game industry? Why is this even necessary here? Video game industry has intense competition, and right here I have Cuphead and Super Meat Boy. These are two indie games that have really shot up in the charts over the last decade or so. Cuphead way more recent than Super Meat Boy. But there is intense competition because video games kind of have a window to become popular and to be exploited and to be embraced and then to kind of be forgotten because consumers, unless it's a franchise and unless there are multiple installations of a video game, consumers are mostly interested in the latest and greatest. And so it's kind of difficult to continually exploit certain media properties. So there's major decision making that has to go on here as well. What is the longevity of Cuphead? Could it be a franchise? Is this something that we can continue to develop? Can we develop different worlds? Can we develop different ecosystems? This all bears down into this notion of customer relationship management. The way that I may have a relationship with customers is having them subscribe to something, or is having them invest in downloadable content, a DLC if you will, or they may give me their email address for any updates on the video game, right? These are avenues and tactics that marketers can use by which to get a sense of where customers are and where we can find customers for that matter. Brand equity is also important here. Brand equity, simply put, is the difference between McDonald's and a place that serves burgers. That added value, whatever it may be, from slapping on a McDonald's logo onto something, is brand equity. That's the measure of brand equity, the added value. Would you care about Cuphead or Super Meat Boy if you knew the games were developed by Nintendo or Sony? Would it matter? Would it not matter? Now, both of these games are indie games. That means they're made by smaller companies, but they're playable on major consoles. So when we think about how to manage brands and customer relationship management, it's really important to consider how intense these relationships are between companies and customers, and how it really is the lifeblood of the product and service itself. In the media and entertainment industries, we have something called long tail. Long tail is this idea that we have so much media out there and entertainment out there that it's very difficult for everything to be played every day. Are people playing Pac-Man right now? Are people listening to the Beach Boys right now? You know, it's a very interesting question when we think about media and entertainment goods, because arguably they are durable. You know, they don't really expire, so to speak, but then again, you could make an argument that video games do expire to some extent when new consoles are introduced or a new generation comes along. So the question is, in 30 years, will people play a newer version of Cuphead? We know that Disney has been able to do this, and we'll see later how nostalgia plays into this notion of how we can extend the longevity of a video game, and its appeal for that matter. Let's keep going. Point of parity, point of difference. It's important when we think about gaming to really think about, why is this game better than another game? Why is this game similar to another game? So points of difference associations and points of parity associations are those. Points of difference, you know, Cuphead and Super Meat Boy take place in different worlds. Cuphead is a throwback to the 1940s and 1930s cartoons. Super Meat Boy is more modern in nature. You know, points of parity both involve non-traditional heroes, one that is made out of meat, one that is basically a cup, if you will. And so quickly we can see how important it is to really think about the landscape as a video game producer or developer, to say, why is my game different? Why would people care? And who am I competing with? Do I want to be similar to my competitors? I might, on some stances, or it might behoove me to be starkly different, to be in stark contrast of what my competitors are doing. Category points of parity. You might call yourself first-person shooter. That's a category. Sports video games, that's another category. Action-adventure, that's another category. Horror, that's another category. How do you stack up to video games in your category? Are you employing similar narrative devices? Is there blood and gore and jump scares in your horror video game? Okay, well, people will definitely identify your video game as horror-driven. But how are you differentiating yourself? It's important to have some points of parity. After all, if you're going to market your video game as horror, you want to be sure you have some horror elements. But after a certain point, you're also going to want to consider how to differentiate your particular brand. Let's keep going. Points of differences, desirability. So we think of points of differences. We look at all these balloons, oranges and yellows and reds and greens. These might be different elements or different characteristics of your game. And so when we're thinking about points of differentiation, we're thinking about a Friday the 13th spin-off video game. We know that there have been Friday the 13th video games. We might want to think about, why is it relevant to create another Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street video game? Why is it relevant now, to do it now in 2020? Those franchises are almost 40 years old. Why is it relevant? We may also want to think about distinctiveness. If we're creating a new game from scratch, that's one thing. We have to really think about the look, the feel, and if you've noticed over the last decade, a lot of indie games have taken great strides in designs. Thinking about a lot of different games here, Hyper Light Drifter, a bunch of other games, even Cuphead comes to mind. A lot of video games have taken great artistic leaps and bounds. And distinctiveness is really critical here because, again, you want to substantiate why consumers have purchased your game. You have to give them a reason that they're going to experience something different. Believability. Can consumers wrap their heads around the belief that your game is different? Is there some sort of believability consumers can grasp on? And really, points of differences get into this notion of desirability. Is it desired for consumers to play a different game? Do consumers want to play a different game? And if you've noticed over the last decade, we've had video games that have taken on, what it's like to have cancer, what it's like to have a child that has cancer, what it's like to kind of play video games that don't necessarily have a story, but are artistic in nature, and you're able to solve puzzles. A video game like Little Nightmares was an excellent game, an absolutely excellent game, but a game, nevertheless, that was very different from a lot of other games. And the story kind of was a slow burn. And so video game authors and writers and developers are taking different narrative strategies and really trying to employ them to stand out. Unfortunately, the video game community has warmly embraced a lot of the changes game developers have made to gaming. Let's keep going. Points of difference, deliverability. Can you deliver on these differences? I can remember watching the Cuphead trailer for the first time saying, this isn't going to work. Like, this is ridiculous. But then I saw an extended Cuphead trailer and I said, oh my God, they did it. They absolutely did it. Like a year later, they did it. They created this video game that's a love letter to the 1930s cartoons, which is absolutely incredible to see. And so I think deliverability is a big element when we're thinking about how gamers might perceive and evaluate companies. What's the feasibility of these differences? Can you do this? Are you biting on too much? Are you biting onto more than you can handle? We know video game developers are constantly under pressure to push the envelope. We know Call of Duty games have had larger and larger maps, more complex maps, greater challenges. We know in Madden football, the latest Madden 2K video game was criticized for allowing players to throw too many interceptions. It seemed like your windows were tighter as a result. So feasibility in creating, a real live football game, has its issues as well. It is difficult in the NFL to throw a pass, but I may not want to throw interceptions as a player. And so that needs to be reconciled. Also, communicability. Can you communicate these differences to your audiences? Sports video games have this issue all the time. Every year, it's the same game. It's the same game. But nevertheless, people make purchases. So Madden and NBA 2K and all other sports video games, MLB as well, all have to really make great advertising pushes about what may be different this year. Certainly player rosters are updated, and that's always a big draw. But it's constantly a struggle to really substantiate why you would spend $60 every year to virtually play the same game, just with a different roster. And then there's sustainability. Can you sustain your competitive point, your competitive difference over time? Are you able to do that? And this is very difficult to do because you're thinking about your competitors. Can they catch up to you? If they do catch up to you, what's the next difference? What's something else that you're going to pivot on, if you will? Let's keep going. Establishing points of parity and points of differences. This is really tough to do, but it's important to do. For one, you want to separate attributes. Separate the attributes of your video game. Settings, environments, characters, story, weapons, points, awards. Separate all of the attributes in your game. You want to leverage equity of another entity if necessary. So you may co-brand with another company here. Or you may have leverage because you have designers who are really good at creating weapons or creating narratives. And then you want to be able to redefine the relationship after you've gone through these lists. And so you may say to yourself, we're no longer this kind of game, we're now this kind of game. And so really by looking at points of parity and points of differences, you're really able to see where the added value is for the gamer, where the added value is for the consumer, and you're able to also articulate why people should buy this game. Let's keep going. Criteria for choosing brand elements. We're thinking about green, we're thinking about sirens, we're probably thinking about Starbucks. And so Starbucks chose green. It's environmental in nature. Starbucks has a siren that's a bit mythological in nature. And so these insignias, these signs, stand out. You know, there really is nothing else that's green with a mermaid on it. And so Starbucks is able to really differentiate itself right out of the gate. First off, there's some sort of memorability going on here. Is the logo memorable? Are the traits memorable? And they are. Meaningful. Is there some sort of meaningfulness from a green mermaid? Or really a white mermaid against a green backdrop, if you will. And there is some meaningfulness because the mermaid is at peace in the logo. The mermaid is happy in the logo. Likability. The logo is very much likable. The green is a very endearing green. Is it transferable? The meanings behind Starbucks. And it is transferable. The mermaid has worked out quite well for Starbucks over the last 30 to 40 years in really creating this element of mystery, this element of sophistication, this element of superiority in the coffee world. And then there's adaptability as well. Can Starbucks adapt against its competitors, namely Dunkin' Donuts being a big one? And then protectability. And Starbucks has really been able to protect itself. There really is no other high-end coffee chain as prominent as Starbucks. There certainly is Gloria Jean's. Ghirardelli chocolate has made coffee as well in the past. There's Lavazza or Lavazza coffee as well, made from Italy. But by and large, Starbucks has really done a great job in being the premier upscale chain for coffee. Let's keep going. Experiential marketing. So with brands, it's really important that there is some sort of experience for the consumer. We're seeing this more and more as brands are trying to reach out further to customers and to talk to them about different experiences. We know with MasterCard is always giving its customers different experiences, really unique experiences. And I've attended the US Open in Queens, New York several times, and American Express is everywhere. And American Express talks about, providing this experience for consumers. It's upscale, it's sophisticated, it's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go to the US Open, and I've been fortunate to go, I believe, 3 times at this point. And so it's important to be able to do this because, as Pine and Gilmore have stated, experience business is the one business that's expanding right now. Companies are looking to give consumers experiences because, quite honestly, MasterCard is just a credit card. That's all it is. Starbucks really is just a cup of coffee. But if you have pop-up stores, if you have celebrities, if you go to these big convention and conference halls, if you fund trips to other destinations, if you start doing these other things that are quite more human and quite more emotional and quite more memorable than just drinking a cup of coffee, your brand rises as something more than just a cup of coffee. It becomes human in nature, and a narrative can be woven around the brand itself. This brand will give me higher expectations or higher standards of living, or I will experience greater experiences through engaging with the brand. All of these thoughts come through when Xbox One works with Shaquille O'Neal, for instance, being larger than life. A lot can be communicated through these experiential business ventures. Shaq is huge. He is an NBA Hall of Famer. He has, memory serves right, 4 to 5 championships. He is a star in every regard, and he is larger than life, and so is Microsoft, for that matter. So we quickly make these associations, how trivial they may appear at first blush, but they become, burnished within our minds. They become branded memories that we hold onto, and we affix to the brand. So I didn't really think much of Xbox One before, but now I'm thinking about it a lot because Shaquille O'Neal is affiliated with the brand itself or with the particular console here. Let's keep going. Brand names and doing your homework. So branding is really, really important, and it's important to communicate brands effectively. And I want to end on this particular slide. There have been some comedic gaffes in the past surrounding brands and surrounding how brands communicate to other people in other languages. So when Braniff Airlines translated a slogan touting its upholstery fly in leather, it came out in Spanish as fly naked. Chicken magnate Frank Perdue's line, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken," was translated in Spanish to mean, "It takes a sexually stimulated man to make a chicken affectionate." And finally, when Gerber, the baby food company, first started selling baby food in Africa, they used the same packaging as in the United States, with the cute baby on the label. I think we've all seen this. Later, they found out that in Africa, companies routinely put pictures on the label of what's inside because most people can't read. And so for many people, nobody wanted to purchase baby food that might have been made with babies. And so sales did not do so hot there. All of this is to say that it's fine and well if you have a good brand, a good logo, a good coloring scheme. You've affixed brand elements to it. You've also thought about points of parity and points of differences. But if you don't communicate effectively to your audience, which increasingly for many companies is usually global without a second thought about it, it's really, really crucial to think about how your slogan, your communication, your emotional touch points, your values are communicated and translated elsewhere. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.